irresistível do cara que fez Attention e já tá conquistando todo mundo.
Às vezes você quer mesmo escutar uma canção especial. Com o Spotify Premium, você ouve a música que quiser, quando quiser, até no smartphone. No Spotify Premium, você ouve música on demand. Experimente agora.
Agora você vai ter mais um motivo para ficar na faculdade. Quem é universitário, paga meia para ser premium no Spotify. Você vai pagar só R$ 8,50 por mês para poder ouvir os seus artistas preferidos onde e quando quiser, online ou offline, com músicas on demand e skip ilimitado. Isso.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, welcome back. We'll have now the presentations of the young researchers. And the first presentation is a Brazilian young researcher, Giovanna Anovazzi Medeiros, that will present the effect of DMSO enema on odontoblast-like cells. Giovanna is a postdoctoral from São Paulo State University at Araraquara in the graduate program in odontopediatrics. Please, Giovanna, come forward. Giovanna has 15 minutes to present, and afterwards we're going to open to a discussion session. Okay? Thank you so much. Where is she? Hi. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Giovanna. I'm from Araraquara Dental School, and my supervisor is Dr. Josimary Hebling, and the title of my presentation is Effect of GMSO and HEMA on odontoblast-like cells. The hybrid layer is a bicomposite formed by dentin proteins, mainly collagen and adhesive monomers, responsible for the micromechanical retention of resin restoration and dentinal sealing. Unfortunately, it is the weakest link of resin-dentin bond. In this study, the restoration was made in vivo and in children, and the research evaluated the microtensile bond strength, and they could verify a better results in the immediate analysis and a reduction in 12 and 36 months after the restoration. This reduction happens because of the degradation in the hybrid layer. This degradation can be caused by the action of the water and by the action of dentin proteases like matrix metalloproteinases, MMPs, and cysteines catepsins. Then it's important to increase the resistance of the hybrid layer to improve the longevity of the restoration. There are two lists to improving this resistance by improving the monomeric infiltration and inhibit the enzymatic action of the dentin. The dimethyl sulfoxide DMSO is a colorless liquid and has a low molecular weight, and is a polar solvent, dissolve both polar and non-polar compounds and many organic molecules. It has the best penetration enhancer for medical purposes. There are few papers that evaluated the GMSO and adhesive dentistry, and these papers demonstrated that GMSO can improve resin-dent bond longevity and inhibit MMP2 and 9. And 50% GMSO can increase the immediate dentin bond strength and improve the infiltration of the monomers. The 50% GMSO produce more durable hybrid layers and increase dentin wettability, which may be responsible for the increase in the dentin adhesive bond. The benefits of GMSO at high concentration are being reported in the literature, but the cytotoxicity of this solvent to odontoblast cells was tested only for low concentration. Then, the aim of this study was to investigate the effect of the saturation of the etched dentin with 50% GMSO on the transdentinal cytotoxicity of HEMA on odontoblast-like cells. For this, we obtained dentin discs from human 30 molars with 0.4 millimeters of thickness. After this, the permeability of the dentin discs were evaluated, and the discs were separated for two phases: the preliminary phase with 40 dentin discs and the experimental phase with 32 dentin discs. In the preliminary phase, we evaluated the IC50 of HEMA, and for this, the groups were control with deionized water and for different concentration of HEMA. Then, the dentin discs were adapted in artificial pulp chamber APC held by two silicones or ring, and after this, the APCs were sterilized. Then, the APCs were placed in culture plate with G-man, and the occlusal surface of the dentin discs were etched with phosphoric acid for 50 seconds, followed by washing and aspiration. Then the discs were then blot dried, and 20 microliters of each solution was applied. After this, the plate was incubated for 24 hours. The extract, which is culture medium plus components of the solutions diffused through dentin, was collected, and this extract was applied for 24 hours in MDPC-23 cells, which are odontoblast-like cells. After this, the cell viability analysis was performed using a Lamar blue assay, and the fluorescence was read in spectrophotometer. Then, in the results for the preliminary phase, we demonstrated that 10 millimolar of HEMA was capable of reducing the cell metabolisms in 47.3%. Then, this concentration of HEMA was used for the next phase. The next phase is the experimental phase, and in this phase, we evaluated the saturation effect of dentin matrix on hematoxicity. For this phase, we used 32 dentin discs subdivided into 4 groups: G1 control with deionized water, G2 50% GMSO, G3 10 millimolar HEMA, and G4 50% GMSO, followed by 10 millimolar of HEMA. In this phase, we used the same protocol that the preliminary phase. Only for G2 and G4, the activity application of 50% GMSO was made, and for G3 and G4 groups, the 20 microliters of HEMA was applied. After this, the plate was incubated, the extract was collected, and the extract was applied for 24 hours in MDPC-23 cells. After this time, the extract was aspirated and replaced by G-man for further analysis. In the experimental phase, the analysis performed were cell viability and ELISA after 24 hours, and total protein, alkaline phosphatase, collagen synthesis, and mineralization nodulus after 7 and 14 days. And the HEMA concentration in the extract was analyzed using spectrophotometer. The ANOVA and Tuckey's tests were used for statistical analysis, and the level of significance was considered 5%. Then, in the results for the cell viability, we could verify that 50% GMSO was not different to the control group, and we verified a significant reduction in the cell viability for HEMA and GMSO plus HEMA groups, but they were not different between them. For the total protein, we observed a significant reduction in 50% GMSO, HEMA, and GMSO plus HEMA groups at 7 days, and in 14 days, the significant reduction was verified only for HEMA and GMSO plus HEMA. For the alkaline phosphatase activity, we also observed a significant reduction in HEMA and GMSO plus HEMA groups at 7 days, and at 14 days, the significant reduction is for 50% GMSO, HEMA, and GMSO plus HEMA groups. For the mineralized nodules, we observed a significant reduction for 50% GMSO, HEMA, and GMSO plus HEMA groups at 7 days, and in 14 days, the significant reduction was to HEMA and GMSO plus HEMA. For the collagen synthesis, we also observed a significant reduction in this synthesis at 7 and 14 days for HEMA and GMSO plus HEMA groups. For the MMP2 synthesis, we added a LPS as positive control of this experiment, and in the results, we observed no difference among the treatment groups and control group. Then, the different treatments had no effect on the synthesis of MMP2. Finally, in the HEMA concentration, we could verify a higher concentration of HEMA when we applied GMSO. But if we look the final concentration, the difference between the groups is very small. It's about 0.007 millimolar. Then, in conclusion, 50% GMSO was not cytotoxic to odontoblast-like cells when applied on dentin, and did not increase the cytotoxicity of HEMA. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Giovanna, for the presentation. For this afternoon, we have Dr. Cynthia Tabashuri and Dr. Junji Tagami as the evaluators. And now we're going to open for questions to Giovanna. Does anyone want to make a question? No.
Hi, Giovanna. Thanks for a nice presentation. How? Hi. Is it? Could you go back a little bit to your results of protein? And I just thought that you might explain that difference between 7 and 14 days. This one for the 50% DMSO, there is a higher concentration percentage comparing to the control in the 14 days. Maybe you just could add some discussion.
The peak of the total protein concentration is in 14 days, and we think that in 7 days we don't have the total protein, because you need more time to produce this protein. I think it's this.
Okay. Anyone else? No? Okay. Thank you so much again. Thank you. Now I'm going to ask Dr. Akimasa Tsushimoto to present bone fatigue strength of current adhesives to enamel and dentin. Dr. Tsushimoto is the assistant professor of the School of Dentistry of Nihon University in Japan. My mistake. Please, Giovanna, come in to get your certificate. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Chairperson, for a kind introduction. And Professor Tagami and Professor Giannini and Dr. Ninkaido, thank you very much for the opportunity to make my presentation today. My name is Akimasa Tsujimoto. I am from the Department of Operative Dentistry of Nihon University in Tokyo. It is a great pleasure to be speaking to you today. I am going to start talking about bond fatigue strength of current adhesive to enamel and dentin at the beginning of the Japanese young researchers' presentation. So first, I would like to look at my clinical work with the cutting-edge material from Japanese manufacturers. With the large number of new techniques and technologies and materials entering the market, many of the traditional approaches in restorative dentistry are being reconsidered, opening the doors to treatment options that were unimagined just a few years ago. The driving forces behind these concepts are predictable, precise, conservative, durable, easy to fabricate, and highly aesthetic restorations. Two key technologies have brought us much closer to reaching these goals: adhesive dentistry and new materials science. Therefore, a lot of researchers, including us, have focused on bond strength evaluations of adhesives with many kinds of materials. An article search of literature conducted this morning using keyword bond strength and dentin gave more than 4,000 publications, and bond strength and enamel gave more than 2,000 publications. Most of those studies were conducted using static bond strength testing, such as shear, tensile, push-out testing, and so on. This means that, This means that a lot of researchers have spent a lot of time this kind of evaluations. However, many researchers already reported that the results from the static bond strength testing may have the limited clinical relevance and should not be used to make clinical suggestions. Theoretically, it should be more clinically important to adhesive interfaces dynamically, and so evaluations using dynamic bond strength testing are highly desirable. There is a long history of researchers trying to develop dynamic bond strength testing. For example, Professor Ralph DeLong of Minnesota University made a chewing simulator, and his first chewing simulator is now in the Smithsonian Museum. He tried to develop dynamic bond strength testing using modified version of his simulator, and his work is continued today by Professor Alex Falk. On the other hand, the Professor Robert Carey, who worked in the NIH and now in the Connecticut University, and Professor James Drummond, who worked at Chicago University, now in the NIH, are still trying to improve dynamic bond strength testing. And I learned from a lot from their work. In addition, younger researchers such as Dr. Jan de Munck from KU Leuven in Belgium and Dr. Mustafa Mutre from Turku University in Finland are trying to extend this kind of testing using quite complex method. Same as other institutes over the past decade, work to improve dynamic bond strength testing has also taken place at the Creighton University School of Dentistry at the city of Omaha in the state of Nebraska in the middle of the US, supported by the big grant from National Institute of Health. City of Omaha is quite famous as one of the wealthy cities in the US because of the hometown of Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is one of the influential investors nationwide and have been trying to make the city of Omaha better for a long time. He has been contributing for education, research, and grand design of the city. That is why our project was also supported by him very much. A wide variety of approaches to dynamic bond strength has been developed by the researchers, as I said before, based on the 3 different types of loading. Static fatigue is that a consistent fatigue load is sustained until fracture. And dynamic fatigue is that load is increased by the fixed rate until fracture. On the other hand, the cyclic fatigue is that loading and unloading take place at the fixed frequency and load amplitude. However, it has been reported that most clinically relevant approach is that cyclic fatigue method. So we are using cyclic fatigue method for our dynamic bond strength testing. Our dynamic bond strength testing was originally developed by Professor Robert Erickson, who worked as one of the heads of the R&D of 3M, and Professor Albert Feltzer, who is well known, of configuration factor, using ACTA fatigue tester at the Academic Center for Dentistry, Amsterdam, in the Netherlands between 2006 and 2008. After Professor Erickson returned to the US, he collaborated with Professor Wayne Bachmeyer and modified this testing using 4-station fatigue cycler from Protec. However, they found that the Protec machine was not sophisticated, and that the only advantage of the machine was that it has 4 chambers. To develop the method, they tried to use a servo-hydraulic testing machine from MTS, but this machine has an oil pump. Those pumps are noisy and they always leak, which is a problem as a fatigue test must be run continuously for a long time. Most recently, this fatigue testing process has been further modified by Dr. Takamizawa and I using an all-electric dynamic testing instrument, the Electron Pulse E1000 from Instron. The Instron machine does not have an oil pump, and well designed. So we are now using this instrument machine for our fatigue bond strength testing. We have already published many articles based on research using this machine, and we believe that this method of dynamic bond strength testing allows better assessment of an adhesive response in the oral environment than the static bond strength testing. In the first stage of research, our colleagues focused on the basic design of the testing using different machines to find a way to measure bond fatigue strength effectively. Now, we are focusing on determining the optimal condition for the testing and have reported important results showing that bond fatigue strength is not influenced by the frequency or the number of cycles within this kind of ranges. Therefore, the fatigue load is currently applied at Creighton University School of Dentistry using a sine wave at 20 Hertz and 50,000 cycles until failure occurs as an accelerated test condition. In this presentation, I would like to introduce the results of our comparison of bond fatigue strength between universal adhesives and two-step self-etch adhesive to enamel and dentin. In this study, 5 universal adhesives, Adhesive Universal from Ivoclar, All Bond Universal from Visco, Clearfield Universal Bond Quick from Claret, and G Premium Bond from GC, and Scotch Bond Universal, which is well known from 3M, and 3 two-step self-etch adhesives, Clearfield SE Bond and Clearfield SE Bond 2 from Claret, and OptiBond XTR from Kawa used. For specimen preparation, we ground enamel and dentin surfaces up to 4,000 grit silicon carbide papers to minimize the influence of abrasive scratches. In the bonding procedure, we used the mold to enclose method with a stainless steel metal ring to reduce the damage to the resin composite. In the fatigue testing, the stress was applied using the sine wave at 20 Hertz for 50,000 cycles or until failure occurred, following the staircase method for fatigue testing. In the staircase method, 15 specimens were tested to determine initial stress level for first specimen using static bond strength testing. If the first specimen survived after the application of the number of cycles with the initial stress level, a new second specimen is tested for the same number of cycles at the stress level that is up to 5% higher. If the first specimen failed, the stress level is reduced by the same amount for the second specimens. Bond fatigue strength testing proceeds normally in this way with about from 20 to 30 specimens up and down the stress based on the surviving or failing at the loading forces. After the bond fatigue strength testing using staircase method, the bond fatigue strength and standard deviation were calculated using this custom Excel sheet with these formulae, which is well known for fatigue testing and previously described by Drone in 1979 of Journal of Dental Research. The calculated bond fatigue strength and standard deviation were analyzed using modified t-test and bone Ferroni correction with the custom program. We developed this statistical analysis in cooperation with the statistician at the Creighton University. This slide shows the results for the bond fatigue strength of universal adhesives. The bond fatigue strength of Scotch Bond Universal to dentin was significantly higher than those of other universal adhesives. However, the bond fatigue strength to unetched enamel was not influenced by the type of adhesive. On the other hand, the phosphoric acid pre-etching of enamel significantly increased the bond fatigue strength of all universal adhesive, and the effect was different depending on the adhesive. This slide shows the results for the bond fatigue strength of two-step self-etch adhesives. The bond fatigue strength of two-step self-etch adhesives to denting and etched enamel was not influenced by the type of adhesive, unlike that to unetched enamel. When comparing the fatigue strength of universal adhesive and two-step self-etch adhesives, the bond fatigue strength under most conditions of two-step self-etch adhesives was significantly higher than those of universal adhesives. Phosphoric acid pre-etching of enamel did not increase the bond fatigue strength of Clearfield SE bond and Clearfield SE bond 2, while it did for universal adhesives. This slide shows the results of clinical studies of universal adhesive and two-step self-etch adhesives. Retention rate of universal adhesive in 2- and 3-year clinical studies was similar to that of two-step self-etch adhesives over 8 and 13 years. In addition, the clinical results for restoration using universal adhesive for 2 and 3 years show that restoration with phosphoric acid pre-etching showed superior clinical results compared to those without pre-etching. On the other hand, pre-etching had an only minor effect with the two-step self-etch adhesive even after 8 or 13 years. These results are quite similar to the results for the bond fatigue strength testing. Therefore, we can conclude that our bond fatigue strength may be an effective way to predict clinical performance of the adhesive systems. However, we still have a lot of questions about our bond fatigue strength testing. For example, previous studies reported that mastication cycles are normally from 1 to 2 Hertz, and that at least 1 million cycles should be used for fatigue testing. Thus, we are now checking the difference between the current accelerated condition and condition more similar to the clinical situations. In addition, we are currently using a chisel-shaped fixture for the testing because we have used this type of fixture for a long time. However, notched-edge fixture designed by Ultradent is used in the ISO standard, so we are now discussing the possible use of notched-edge fixture for our bond fatigue strength testing with Ultradent. Furthermore, number of specimens per testing group was different depending on the researcher. I think at least 20 specimens per group are necessary for our testing, but I would like to look further at in the future. Although we still have those kinds of questions for our testing, but we hope that answering them will not be a further development of this fatigue testing, but also provide better information to clinicians worldwide. Finally, I could not give this kind of presentation without support from the faculty members of Creighton University School of Dentistry, so I'd like to thank especially to Professor Wayne Bachmeyer and Professor Bob Erickson and the others here. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Professor. Now we have time for questions. Does anyone want us to make?
Thank you very much for the nice presentation. It's very interesting. So in your evaluation system, is it possible to detect the fracture site, or can you anticipate the particular layer at the interface that can be deteriorated after this kind of testing?
Yeah, so after testing, we of course we check the fracture surface using the SEM, but at the moment I couldn't distinguish which layer is the most influential factor for the bond fatigue strength testing, but I have to look at further in detail in the future.
Okay, all those. And also the results may be correlated with the clinical evaluation results, but in the clinical situation, the stress application is very variable according to the type of the cavity and the restorations. What kind of restoration is the most correlated with this kind of testing? Cervical restoration or class 1 or class 2?
So in this presentation, I showed the clinical result of non-carrier cervical region. So this result, our result was comparative to those kinds of results. That's why. So maybe especially in those kind of stress, we should simulate that using this kind of testing maybe.
Thank you very much.
There's one for you.
Thank you for the presentation. My question is, if we know the importance of testing the fatigue strength of dentine bonding or enamel bonding, did you check the results of the fatigue strength against static bond strength to see if the ranking is similar?
Yeah, before the fatigue testing, we checked the bond strength using static bond strength testing. Because of we have to determine the initial stress level for the staircase method. So, but the number of the bond strength is a bit different from the results of static testing and the dynamic testing. So, I want to. So I believe the results of the dynamic testing is more valuable for the clinician for the to check the ability of the adhesive systems at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much again, Professor. And I'd like to give you the certificate. I won't forget this time. Thank you so much. Now, I'd like to call Dr. Carolina Bossandré from University of Campinas, Piracicaba Dental School, who is going to present, where's your research? Modulation of Streptococcus mutans virulence by dental adhesives. Dr. Bosso is the postdoctoral of the graduate programs in clinical dentistry. Please welcome Dr. Carolina.
Good afternoon. My name is Carolina André, and I will present part of my PhD thesis entitled Modulation of Streptococcus mutans virulence by Dental Adhesives. That was developed in collaboration with Oregon Health and Science University, supervised by Dr. Marcelo Giannini, Dr. Pedro Rosalén, and Dr. Jack Ferracamp. So, to overcome some disadvantages of the restorative composites, such as contraction gaps and the degradation of the bonding, that may lead to recurrent caries and the failure of the restorative materials. Restorative materials containing antibacterial agents have been developed. Therefore, substances with broad antimicrobial spectra have been added to these restorative materials with no concern regarding the oral health resident bacteria or the promotion of bacterial resistance. The Streptococcus mutans does not always dominate within plaque. However, it can assemble an insoluble polymeric matrix in presence of sucrose, the exopolysaccharides, that act as a supportive framework and a barrier to the diffusion within the oral biofilm structure. The matrix of cariogenic biofilms are recognized as essential virulence factors association with the initiation of the cariogenic biofilm, and the main constituents of this matrix are the polysaccharides, mostly glucan synthesized by the microbial glucosyltransferases, the GTFs. So 2 compounds were isolated from the Brazilian propolis, and they are called anti-carry agents. One of them is apigenin, a flavone, that's a potent inhibitor of water-insoluble glucan synthesis, and the other one is titifarnisol, a sesquiterpene, that can change the permeability of the cell membrane, affecting the production and secretion of the GTFs. So, in contrast to microbiocidal agents, the degradation of the matrix components may be potentially more efficacious and less likely to induce bacterial resistance. In addition, these 2 anti-carry agents are considered non-toxic and non-mutagenic both in vivo and in vitro studies. So the objective of this study was to incorporate these 2 anti-carry agents, apigenin and titifarnisol, into 2 commercial dental adhesives and analyze the effect of these additions on the virulence of Streptococcus mutans biofilm by the quantification of the polysaccharide production, the effect on the dentin bonding mechanism by bond strength and resin dentin interface analysis, and the effect of these additions on the overall degree of conversion and current kinetics. Previous published data showed that these compounds combined with fluoride presented better results regarding the reduction of virulence of Streptococcus mutans. Therefore, for this study, 2 commercial dental adhesives containing fluoride in neat composition were chosen. One self-etch adhesive, the Clear Filter IS Bond Plus, and one etch and rise adhesive, the OptiBond S. Apigenin was added at a concentration of 1 millimolar, and titifarnisol at a concentration of 5 millimolar. When these compounds were combined, the same concentrations were used. Also, these concentrations were chosen based on a previous published data. So to analyze the effect of these additions into dental adhesives on the virulence of Streptococcus mutans, these adhesives were applied on hydroxyapatite discs, light activated, saliva coated, and left for 5 days, growing in low molecular weight with 1% sucrose and Streptococcus mutans, changing the media every day. After this period, all the biofilm was collected and processed to analyze the amount of dry weight, to count the bacterial viability, to calculate the polysaccharides and the protein amount, and also 1 additional disc of each group was analyzed under scanning electron microscopy. Also, for this methodology, 1 disc with no adhesive applied was also used as a control group. For dentin bond strength and resin dentin interfacial morphology, the teeth had the occlusal enamel removed. The adhesives were applied according to each manufacturer. And for bone-strained teeth were cut in 1 millimeter slabs and tested after 24 hours or 1 year in water storage. And for resin dent interfacial morphology, the restored teeth were cut in half and polished and analyzed under scanning electron microscopy. For overall degree of conversion, discs with 5 millimeter diameter per 0.5 millimeter thickness had the solvent removed and light cured during 1 minute. Regarding the results from the bacterial assay, in this graph, it is possible to observe that the additions did not interfere with the bacterial viability for any addition or the combination for both adhesives tested. However, the dry weight decreased when apigenin or apigenin and farnesol were added to clear fill, or when apigenin or farnesol were added to OptiBond. Some decrease of the dry weight is found for the combination of both compounds into OptiBond, however, with no statistical difference from the same adhesive with no addition. Also, all the 8 groups presented a statistical difference compared to the disc with no adhesive applied on. Regarding the amount of polysaccharides, tendency in decreasing the insoluble polysaccharide was found with the additions into the adhesives. However, only a statistical difference was found for the addition of apigenin into clear fill or the addition of farnesol into OptiBond. For this polysaccharide, no difference was observed between both adhesives with no additions to the same disc with no adhesive applied. Also, all the adhesive with the additions, except for the combination for OptiBond, presented a statistical difference compared to the disc with no adhesive. So biofilms containing lower amount of this insoluble glucan can disrupt the stability and the integrity of the biofilm, affecting the diffusion properties and reducing the biting sites for other microorganisms equally or even more acidic and acidogenic than Streptococcus mutans. Likewise, there was a tendency in decreasing the intracellular polysaccharide when these compounds were added to the adhesives. However, a statistical difference was only observed with the addition of apigenin or apigenin and farnesol to clear fill. No statistical difference was found for OptiBond with the additions compared to the same adhesive with no addition. However, this adhesive with no addition presented a statistical difference when compared to the disc with no adhesive applied, and also with clear fill with no addition, which we may suggest that the monomeric composition of each adhesive itself can alter the S. mutans biofilm without interfering with the bacterial viability. This intracellular polysaccharide is endogenous sources that can be metabolized when exogenous sources are depleted in the oral cavity, prolonging the exposure to tooth surfaces to organic acids, leading to caries formations. In addition, the reduction of these 2 polysaccharides, the insoluble and the intracellular polysaccharide, can affect the ability of the Streptococcus mutans to colonize the tooth surface, to become dominant and express its virulence in plaque without necessarily killing the target organism or disrupting the resident microorganisms. No difference was found for the water-soluble or the protein content. Also, the combination of these 2 compounds did not increase the reduction of the virulence of Streptococcus mutans, and the effect of apigenin or the T-farnesol was material dependent. When we analyze the biofilm under scanning electron microscopy, the disc with no adhesive, the clear fill with no addition, and the OptiBond with no addition presented more overlapping colonies compared to the other adhesives with the additions that present some modification in the structure of the biofilm. Regarding the bond strength results, no addition interfered with the bond strength values for both adhesives tested. OptiBond presented higher values compared to clear fill for the same group and for the same storage time. However, the OptiBond decreased the bond strength after 1 year of storage, and conversely, the clear fill maintained the bond strength after 1 year in water storage for all groups. Analyzing the morphology of the resin-dentin interface, the OptiBond presented thicker hybrid layer compared to the clear fill. However, for the same adhesive, the no addition group and the addition group did not present any modifications for both adhesive tested. Thus, we can suggest that the small concentration used of these compounds used in this work were not able to impair the dentin bonding mechanism, and the main function of the adhesives were preserved. Additionally, from the current kinetics results, no addition was able to impair the current kinetics when comparing the same adhesive with no addition and the adhesives with the anti-carry additions. For the overall degree of conversion, some statistical difference can be found when these compounds were added to the adhesives. However, this small increase or decrease is not considered significant for degree of conversion. So in conclusion, the additions of these anti-carry agents to dental adhesive may represent a novel alternative to decrease the cariogenicity of the biofilm around dental restorations. The addition of apigenin or apigenin farnesol to clear fill presented better results regarding the reduction of Streptococcus mutans virulence without suppressing the target microorganism, and also the effect of these anti-carry agents depended on the chemical composition of the dental adhesive, and no addition interfered with the dentin bonding mechanism. So this research was supported by Brazilian financial agencies, the CNPq and FAPESP, and I would like to thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carolina and Andrea. We are now open for questions.
Thank you very much for wonderful presentation. I would like to know how long does the effect last after the treatment?
So we are still working on it to know how many years this effect will continue on the biofilm. I have some specimens that are stored in water. So we will perform after 2 years of storage and so on to keep looking this effect. But we still don't know how many years this can last.
I don't know so much about the effect of the propolis. Yeah. It looks very nice. Yeah. And if you have a kind of material or the toothpaste or rinsing, mouth rinsing liquid, including propolis, I should buy there.
Yeah. So the first idea with these compounds were to add a toothpaste or mouth gardens. However, they are not soluble in water. They are soluble in an alcohol media, so they don't work well. They need to be encapsulated and to work in toothpaste.
Thank you.
Does anyone else wants to make a question? I do have a question. Actually, she has to help me. I guess you showed us that Clearfield S3 bond, they have better performance after 1 year of water storage. Is that it? Yeah. With the addition of apigenin and TT-fernisol, please explain.
He had a stable bond strength after 1 year for all groups with addition or no addition in water. But at the end, I showed that it had better results when added to Clearfield, the apigenin or apigenin-fernisol. And these results, we suggest that is due to the filler content of the OptiBond S, because OptiBond S has a higher amount of OptiBond S, and since these compounds are soluble in the monomeric part, the filler might impair the contact with the biofilm, the contact with the compounds in the biofilm. That's why we think it was better with Clearfield.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to question something? No? I'm going to ask Dr. Marcelo to come here and give Carolina the certificate. And thank you again for the wonderful presentation. Thank you. Now, I'm going to call Dr. Shibuya to present the influence of 10-MDP on the bond strength of resin cement. Dr. Shibuya is assistant professor at Okayama University, the Graduate School of Medicine, Dentistry, and Pharmaceutical Science in Japan. Where's him? Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Shibuya.
Thank you very much for Chairperson. My name is Kazuhiko Shibuya from Okayama University in Japan. Our presentation title is The Influence of 10-MDP on the Bond Strength of Resin Cement. First, functional monomer can promote wetting and etching and ionic binding to substrate. In particular, 10-MDP is one of the most stable functional monomer to chemical binding to calcium in hydroxyapatite. So we aim to evaluate the influence of 10-MDP content in self-adhesive resin cement on dentin bond strength and physical properties. And for evaluation of dentin bond strength, we conduct microtensile bond strength tests. And second, for evaluation of physical properties, we conducted 3-point bending test and water absorption and solubility test. This slide shows materials we used in our studies. We used experimental resin cements and extracted premolar human teeth and Estenia C&B4 composite resin blocks and Clearfield porcelain bond activator and K-etchant surface treatment. And experimental resin cement is two-paste light-curing resin cement. And this slide shows the composition of experimental resin cements. A paste includes metacrylate monomers and 10-MDP and cyanate glass filler and photoinitiator and chemical initiator. And B paste includes metacrylate monomers and cyanate glass filler, and accelerators. And in APS 10 MDP is contains 3 different weight percent. That is 3.3 weight percent, and 6.6 weight percent, and 9.9 weight percent responsibility. This table shows the weight percent of 10 MDP. First, RC1 cement contains 3.3 weight percent of 10 MDP. And second, RC2 cement contains 6.6 weight percent of 10 MDP. And finally, RC3 cement contains 9.9 weight percent of 10 MDP. And this slide shows how to conduct microtensile bond strength test. As I mentioned before, we used extracted human teeth and composite resin blocks. First, we removed the corneal enamel and airball to flatted dentin, and we treated aluminum sandblasting 5 seconds, and ultrasonic cleaning 2 minutes, and phosphoric acid etching 5 seconds, and cyanate treatment for surface of composite resin. And we bonded the dentin and the composite resin with using experimental resin cement. The bonded sample was stored in distilled water at 37 degrees for 20 hours. After storage 20 hours, each sample is sectioned by using isometric diameter saw, and the beams was subject to easy test at crosshead speed 1 millimeter per minute. And the fracture specimens were analyzed failure modes by using scanning electron microscope. This is how to conduct a 3-point bending test. We made the beams from experimental resin cement like this slide, and we stored sample in distilled water at 37 degrees for 20 hours. And we used universal testing machine, and the condition is crosshead speed is 1 millimeter per minute, and the support span of 20 millimeter. And additionally, we conduct water absorption and solubility test. First, we made a thick resin disc, and the resin disc is 50 millimeter in diameter and 0.5 millimeter of thickness. And we stored samples in desiccator at 37 degrees for 20 hours. And we measure this sample's weight, and this weight defined as M1. And we stored sample in distilled water at 37 degrees for 30 days, and measure again. This weight defined as M2. And we stored sample again. We stored sample in desiccator at 37 degrees for 20 hours, and measure again. This weight defined as M3. And the water absorption and the solubility is evaluated to this formula according by ISO 4049. This is a result of microtensile bond strength test. As shown this slide, and the strength of RC2 is higher than RC1. But there is no significant difference between RC2 and RC3. This is a result of fracture modes. Mainly fracture modes is mixed fracture, mixed failure. This is a result of 3-point bending test. There is no significant difference between all MDP contents. This is a result of water absorption. As shown this slide, the water absorption of resin cement is increased with increase in weight percent of MDP content. And this is a result of water solubility. There is no significant difference between all MDP content. Discussion. Our study's result indicates that 10 MDP can enhance the bond strength of resin cement. However, there is no significant difference of micro-tensile bond strength between 6.6 weight percent and 9.9 weight percent. And moreover, the water absorption of resin cement was increased with an increase in weight percent of 10 MDP. We think that is because of increase of hydrophilic group in 10 MDP. The reaction of the adhesive bond over time is caused by hydrophilic of resin and collagen in the hybrid layer. So therefore, water absorption of resin cement should be lower. So it is necessary, we think it is necessary that weight percent of 10 MDP should be evaluated to achieve sufficient dentin bonding and lower water absorption. In conclusion, micro-tensile bond strength was improved by 10 MDP up to 6.6 weight percent content. The water absorption of resin cement was increased in 10 weight percent of 10 MDP. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Now we are open to questions. Everybody's shy. Anyone?
Okay. Yeah. When you evaluate the when you evaluated the fracture mode of the specimen, so the most of the specimen showed the mixed.
Yeah, mixed
failure.
failure.
Mixed. What is the mixed failure?
Most is comprehensive in cement and interfacial failure.
Interface
Yeah.
of
Half.
what? Of what? Dentin and cement, or cement and material?
And so, dentin and cement. That is
Okay. I understand that in the product Panavia, in the past time,
yeah.
the Panavia,
SL King.
yes, the previous Panavia contained MDP.
Yeah, hi, yes.
Yes. So what the difference between the old material and your material?
And this experimental resin cement, other studies, we tried to addition fluoride in this cement, and if we try to addition fluoride, bond strength is lower, but sorry. Panavia has release fluoride, and this experimental resin cement is no fluoride, so this cement is no fluoride.
Okay, so you think, you consider that the fluoride release may not be necessary from the resin cement?
Yeah, but 9.9 weight percent MDPs show more highest water absorption. But if add to fluoride, 6.6 weight percent show more lower strength, but 9.9 weight percent of cement show higher strength, bonding strength. So if we try to add fluoride in experimental resin cement, we think we need more weight percent of MDP.
No questions? So I'm going to ask Dr. Giannini to come forward to give Dr. Shibuya his certificate. Thank you so much again. Okay, thank you. And now we have the third lecture of a Brazilian mentor, that is from Dr. Andrea Reis, who is going to present Translating Adhesive Dentistry Research into Improved Clinical Practice. Dr. Reis is Associate Professor of the School of Dentistry of University of Guarulhos here in Brazil, and he's going to give us the lecture now. Afterwards, we're going to have a coffee break, but I'll tell you on the right time. Thank you again, Dr. Reis.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Everybody's awake? After lunch, a little bit difficult? Well, thank you very much for your presence. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'd like to thank Dr. Marcelo Giannini for inviting me over and for organizing this awesome meeting, because I know it's not easy to bring all these people here. And I'd like to thank Dr. Nikaido and Dr. Tagami for organizing in the Japanese side. And also, I'd like to thank the Brazilian government and the Japanese government for making this meeting possible. And it's not easy for me as a young researcher. Am I a young researcher? Still young, Marcelo? Not anymore. But yeah, in front of you guys, I mean, they're probably the biggest minds in adhesive dentistry. They are the biggest brains here, and most of them are my friends. Thanks for being my friends. So I hope I don't have very difficult questions afterwards. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my vision of adhesive dentistry. Of course, we share many concepts, but some of them end up diverging a little bit. But I think it's healthy, and I think it's the best moment for discussing. At this moment, we're not. It's not a championship. I'm not trying to make a goal against to score a goal against Japan. This is time for cooperating and exchanging ideas between Japan and Brazil. So I'm very happy to be part of this meeting. I'm very happy also to be here on this stage 17 years later. I graduated here at the Piracicaba Dental School. I spent 10 years of my life here, and I was lucky not only to be a student of Many professors are here, and I respect them a lot. But I think I was very lucky to meet Poliana, because she was my classmate here. And I have now Poliana, Laura, and Mateus that are the most important things I have in my life. During this time I spent here, I was mentored by Dr. Marcelo Giannini. Linda Wang said I'm very lucky, and I'm really very lucky. I was mentored by Dr. Marcelo Giannini, and later I was mentored by Dr. Patricia Pereira during the part of my PhD. And I was fortunate to be able to win the Puffenbarger Award and the Brazilian division of the Hatton Award. Today I'm a lecturer at the Guarulhos University, and we're able to develop research in there. And also I'm a dentist, and I try to bring the doubts I have in the clinical practice to our research. And so it's a little bit difficult for me when I'm practicing. And I have so many steps to perform a technique, to perform a restoration, to perform a cementation. So I try to, during the research we perform, try to check if we could make things simpler, a little bit easier for the dentists. I didn't realize that I could become a digital influencer. And I finally added this to my CV after I had 30 million views of this very simple video I made. It was shown on TV, it was shown everywhere. And several patients from all over the world, they sent me messages to ask if I could treat them or if I could refer them to a dentist that was doing the same technique as I do. That was really interesting. I didn't realize it would be possible. And now people finally started to listen to what I have to say. This is the video. It's a very, very simple video. Class 1 composite restoration with a book fill composite. Yes, it was SDR. And this video was made maybe 2 years before I posted it in the social media. I was not a big fan of social medias. And we placed a 4mm layer of SDR composite, which is a low stress composite. And then we made a restoration, increment by increment, very simple sculpting technique for the occlusal, a regular composite. And this is maybe what made patients like it, because it's a big, large cavity, and in a few minutes we could restore it. I make a joke because lots of people say that dentistry is art, but in fact dentistry is not art at all. Most of it is just science. We have to make things easier, because maybe in this room with 300 people, I bet there are not more than 2 or 3 artists here that really could sculpt a full mouth or make large drawings. So I'd like to develop techniques that all my students and anyone can use. Yeah, so this is the final result. I can read minds, and at this moment, most of you are thinking, Andrea, come on, just a class 1? Yeah, it's just a class 1 cavity, and patients liked it. But what really matters now is that, okay, I made a big splash with a small class 1 composite restoration, but what is interesting is that, in fact, book fill composites, they only exist because of my research. I didn't develop, I'm not a chemist, but I'm lucky, as you said. And in 2007, I was invited. I had already won these 2 important awards. So I was a promise. I was in that time a young investigator, and I was invited to go into Dentistry Calc in the United States for talking with the chemists and talking with everybody else in there. And at that time, they brought to me a prototype. And it was not called SDR at that time, and they brought it to me. Skip Bertrand is one of the chemists, and asked me, "Could you please test it in a phantom, in a model?" And I used it. I said, "Oh, wow, it's amazing," but there's no way it can work. From all the previous knowledge we had, we knew that a flowable composite could not work at all. And then I came back to Brazil, and they asked me if I could do some tests with that composite. And Rodrigo Verzut is here. He helped me a lot in that project 10 years back, 10 years ago. And I said, of course not. Of course, why not? I'm going to make some tests. I'm going to make some money. I'm going to put some dollars in my pocket, and I'm going to tell them that it doesn't work, because it could not work. And to our surprise, it worked better than the incremental filling technique. And then it was launched, the composite resin was launched. And several years later, I met them during an ADR meeting. We were having dinner, and they said, "Andre, we never told you, but the project for the SDR was about to be killed. We wouldn't go over with the project. But when we received your results, everybody got so happy that we started doing several other tests, and we finally launched the composite. So you are responsible for SDR being launched and for all the other book fill composites that came afterwards." And that's interesting. I like this sentence from Dr. from Amir Klink. He's not a doctor. From Amir Klink, that what kills a project sometimes is intellectual arrogance. It's the imposition of the solution, the fact that you do not listen. And this is what happens several times, because we already know the answer, so we don't even listen what people have to say. Yeah, and of course it's kind of weird to believe that this composite could work. It presents a self-leveling characteristic. I believe these moments is also important. We have to wait for it to accommodate in the cavity. Dr. Tagami mentioned this morning about one of the studies they had, and I was talking with Alireza why we had so different results. And one of the Dr. Alireza, he observed a gap formation in the bottom of the cavity, and I think we realized that the main difference in our studies was the C factor, which was much higher in the cavity Dr. Alireza had at the time he did this study in Tokyo. So the C factor I had was a more clinically like cavity. The first increment for SDR had a C factor of 4.33, while Dr. Alireza had a C factor of 6.33. So this is why we had so much different results. So if you have, of course, a higher C factor, then the challenge is much higher than the one we have in a cavity. And we always have to think about volumetric shrinkage is different than shrinkage stress. We're talking about different things. Volumetric shrinkage is related to degree of conversion and the inorganic and organic matrix ratio, while shrinkage stress depends on several factors. such as the C factor, polymerization, reaction speed, the elastic modulus, and the shrinkage, the moment shrinkage occurs, if in the pre-gel or in the post-gel phase. And all these factors, they are related to the capacity of the composite to deform itself instead of transmitting stress to the resin-dentin interface. So this composite, at that time, it was called SDR, but SDR meant stress decreasing resin. But of course, the marketing department couldn't allow composite to be called stress decreasing resin. So then later, and this name was developed by the chemists, of course. And then they already had the acronym SDR, so they changed it for Smart Dentin Replacement. So these guys are very smart. And these are some of the images we have from the studies we did from 10 years later. And what's interesting here is that we see the formation of the SDR layer. So the composite still shrinks, so it's not a low shrinkage composite, even though it has a little bit lower shrinkage, volumetric shrinkage. The most important is that it has a lower stress. It produces lower stress because it's able to deform itself and decrease the stress transmitted to the interface. So the incremental layering technique, we've been doing this for 30 years. And I believe after 30 years, of course, the chemists, they have improved their work, and so we can finally place bulk fill composites. I'm going to get a bottle of water here just a moment. There's always a way. There's always a different way, more efficient, simpler, and more profitable to do the things that everyone is determined to do mechanically without ever questioning. And so these first studies I didn't publish because I just sent them and they published in a scientific compendium. But the first presentation was at the IDR in Miami. At that time, there was no studies on bulk fill composites, just mine. And I went to several places talking about this. Nowadays, we have almost 100 papers published in PubMed about this topic, and most of them agree with me. This is a 5-year randomized clinical trial. It's presented very good results, almost better than the incremental filling technique. And this study tested the adhesion to the cavity bottom dentin. And we see here that at 4 millimeters, only SDR presented acceptable results. So it's not because all of them are in the same category of bulk fill composites that they present the same chemistry. So they present different chemistries, and it's this stress transmission is very important for the bulk fill composites. This is one of the studies we did with Dr. Ronaldo Hirata, that we did microcomputer tomography, and observed that all composites, they present shrinkage. They present a reduction in volume. But this is good if this reduction in volume is just presented as deformation at the surface and not as stress transmitted to the interface. This was done by Dr. Rosi Komagai, my PhD student, that she's in Japan now. Thanks for accepting her. And she tested bone strength to the bottom of, to the gingival walls of class 2 cavities. And also the bulk fill technique performs better than the incremental filling technique. So we already know the advantages and disadvantages of adhesive restorations. But what are the new technologies for? They should eliminate the disadvantages. So we should practice better, easier, and faster dentistry. Better, because we should not have postoperative sensitivity. We should not lose retention. Restorations can't change color, can't break, can't leak and they have to last long. Easier. Anyone should be able to do it. And here this room is packed of PhDs, right? But the techniques should be able to be performed by anyone. Undergrad students and any dentist should be able to perform. You don't need to be a PhD to be able to make a nice restoration, because most of the clinicians, they are not PhDs and they have just the basic training. The technique must be simple, so when someone tries to incorporate more steps into the technique, I always ask, are these steps really necessary? So we shouldn't complicate. And faster, why faster? Because time is important for me and for you, and of course for the patients. Sometimes when I was a graduate student, I was about 10 minutes. I had plenty of time at that time, so 10 minutes was nothing to me. But nowadays, I think for 10 minutes, I would have arrived. I wouldn't have arrived late to pick up my daughter at school. For 10 minutes, I could have answered my wife on the phone. For 10 minutes, I could have done something else. And if you save 10 minutes in 5 patients, then it's already 50 minutes in your life. So we should think of it. So we think a lot about statics nowadays, but we shouldn't forget that it should come after health, then function, and last statics, it comes all together. We cannot separate them. So when we think about static dentistry, we should always think about function. So in this case, the dentist didn't think about function, so he performed only veneers in the anterior teeth and forgot to reestablish function. So of course we have a beautiful smile, and we should not separate things. We should always think about the substrate. We should always think about biology. And then we will have beautiful and long-lasting results. So when I look at this slide, of course, the veneers are beautiful, but this is a success because we have very healthy periodontium. Don't forget, we also think about self-esteem. We can develop self-esteem to the patients. Most of the time, we don't realize it until we finish the work. So we can have very happy patients using the techniques we learned from adhesive dentistry. So why should our restorations be perfect? These are the topics I'm going to talk. I'm going to talk about the KISS technique, about adhesive principles, what happens in vivo, and the durability of adhesion. Of course, I won't be able, I always have to jump a few hundred slides and go to the end. So, of course, the restorations are very important. So it doesn't matter if you have a very nice endodontic treatment. If you don't have an adequate restorations, your restoration, the success of your tooth will not be okay. It will fail. So the endodontic treatment will only be effective if an adequate sealing is obtained with the restoration. As you can see here, the patient said she needed an implant, but in fact, she needed more than an implant. She had secondary caries, maladapted restorations, short posts, periapical problems, bone loss. So we had to use all the concepts we have to cement post. We did endodontic retreatment, made fiber post cementation, core build-up, cementation of crowns. So now we can use all the knowledge we have of adhesive dentistry to return function and health to the patient, and also aesthetics. So it's not easy to do everything, but we cannot separate all the concepts we have to make very beautiful and long-lasting adhesive restorations. Of course, some patients, they don't like to be famous, so I get some disfars for them. So let's make teeth for those who need teeth. because enamel is different than ceramic, we know that. It's very difficult to reproduce the real life. So whenever possible, such as in a case like this, we try to bond together the old tooth fragment. And this is after a few weeks. So the most important here is that we kept the tooth, the pulp alive. Sometimes we need to do veneers, or in Brazil we're talking about contact lenses. But in this case, specifically, we're doing it because the patients had a functional problem, and we could not work only on the posterior teeth. We had also to work on the anterior teeth to return function to her smile. So she ended up getting beautiful, but it was not the main part of the treatment. So why our tooth reconstructions should be perfect? Because patients do weird things. I have never seen a tooth fracture under normal occlusal function, and strange things happen to patients. I'm trying to make a campaign to change the food habits in Brazil, because this is guilty for most tooth fractures here in Brazil. I don't know in Japan, but here in Brazil, several patients come and say that they had a fracture eating bread. And when I say that weird things happen to patients, this patient called me on a Sunday, Father's Day. Dr. Alessandro Silva called me, André, please, could you please see this patient? And when this patient arrived, I asked him, what happened? And he said, I don't remember. I can't remember. My head hurt, and I woke up without this. So maybe it would have been a good idea to have a fiber pulse. I don't know if it would prevent this fracture, but maybe it could have happened. So why should anyone be able to do good restorations? Anyone, not just PhDs, not only specialists. Because of strength, sealing, aesthetics, we know it all. But because it's easy, and because it's very easy. I like the KISS technique. You probably know that it's not the rock band. KISS means keep it simple, stupid, or keep it stupidly simple, or any variation of these letters. But simple does not mean superficial. Great ideas in general condense sophisticated thoughts. So that's what I talked to you before. We try to make things simple so anyone can do it. So this is another example of a video. This is a class 2. We used the Palodent V3 for making the proximal contact. We used Premium Bond Universal for bonding, and this adhesive, it's not sensitive to moisture, so that's why I'm drying a lot. This in the United States it's called Premium Bond Active. Here in Brazil it's called Premium Bond Universal. Evaporated solvent, light cured, and then we placed 4 millimeters. We had 10 millimeters total, so we placed 4. And then we placed 4 extra millimeters. And then we had a regular composite for making the occlusal sculpture. I'm not going to show the full movie because it has already had more than 500,000 visualizations. So there's a different level of difficulty of restorations. Of course, the class 1s are the most easy. Then the class 2, then the indirect restorations, and of course the anterior restorations are the most difficult. We keep studying a lot the anterior teeth. We spent a lot of money on composites for the anterior teeth. But 2/3 of restorations, of direct restorations, are in posterior teeth. So maybe we should focus more on the posterior teeth. Class 2 are the most difficult ones to perform. We have problems of contact point, adaptation, recurrent caries. So we should, of course, keep all the concepts together. We cannot forget any of them. And this is one of the theories, the 3 S's. We need to seal, shape, and shade. So these are materials that make our life easier in the private practice, in our everyday practice. So we should never ignore the adhesive dentistry concept, because our restoration would fail. In adhesive dentistry, thinking microscopically can be as important as seeing microscopically. So this is the classification, the current classifications we have. Now we have the universal adhesives, which are self-etching adhesives, single-step systems that can also be applied with phosphoric acid. They can be applied as self-etching in denting, but in enamel, they should always be applied as etch and rinse systems. So for the young people, this would be like comparing streaming and a single-step universal adhesive, comparing with the old system, the 3-step, comparing with the vinyl discs. But again, not all the universal adhesives are the same. So this study was performed by Dr. Franklin Tay and his team, and these 2 studies, and they observed that for some of the systems, they had a giant drop in bond strength over time, after 1 year, both in self-etch and etch and rinse adhesives. The ones that performed better at these times were Scotch Bond Universal and Primary Bond Elect. So several years ago, when I was in my PhD, these adhesives would not work fine. They would have plenty of leakage. But of course, 10 years later, they should have improved. So this study was performed by Dr. Carlos Pena. He was my PhD student. He promised that he will recall these patients so we can have the more long-term data. After 2 years, we had similar clinical effectiveness between the Clearfield SC bond and the 1-step self-etching adhesive. This is called Xeno 5, with and without etching the enamel margins. We just had some marginal discoloration for both groups, for the 4 groups. It was not a big problem. But 2 years is nothing. We have 30 years follow-up, and this work is from Dr. Pallesen and Van Disken. And after 30 years, the 3 composites they test presented good clinical performance. Now we're talking about 30 years. 30 years, then this is almost forever. I say that the restoration should last forever, and people say, but Andre, how can a restoration last forever? I don't know how long is forever, but for me, forever is when you ask a patient, who did this job in your mouth, and the patient says, I don't remember, then this is forever. so probably in your life, a restoration would need to be repaired sometimes 2 or 3 times, but 30 years is really good results. These are 2 other clinical evaluations for 17 years and for 22 years, and both studies say also that we had good results after these times. But what happens in vivo? This is one of the studies I co-authored this from Dr. Marcela Carrillo, that we observed defects in the hybrid layer in vivo. But I had to, later I started to think what happened, and I don't agree anymore with this. Something is happening, but not exactly this is happening. I think that this was observed because we made demineralized specimens for transmission electron microscopy. I made other study that 10 years ago I was doing so many things that I could not publish this paper, but it's kind of a case report. We had 2 patients. I did this study. It was an idea of Dr. Saulo Geraldelli when he was working at the Guarulhos University. And of course we have MMPs, but what else we have in vivo? We have dentinal fluid, we have odontoblastic process, we have phosphoproteins, we have proteoglycans, we have sialoproteins, growth factors, morphogenetic proteins, tissue inhibitors of metalloproteinase. We have some other things that I probably didn't say here. But we did observation in vivo. This is the patients we had at that time. This is pre-denting. And I observed how mineralization occurs in pre-denting. So we have all these things that I mentioned in a collagen matrix. And matrix mineral deposition occurs. And we have mineral formation here. When we etch dentin, what we do, we remove mineral. And then we expose this collagen matrix again with all these things I just mentioned. But what we observed as interesting here, in fact, we had 2 patients that we observed after 6 months. The premolars were extracted for orthodontic reasons, and we observed something that looks like mineral deposition at the base of the hybrid layer. And we can observe also something that is not usual to observe in regular specimens we perform in vitro, because this is for me, this is the odontoblastic process. We have here, we see this region here. Again, the odontoblastic process, and it looks like mineral deposition here with look at higher magnification. In the middle of the hybrid layer, we observed mineral deposition. And this is something this is not possible to happen. So maybe this is what happened at that study we did with Dr. Franklin Tace, but the specimens, he demineralized for sectioning. So if you demineralize the specimens, you see this as holes. So this is probably, we probably have the MMP acting at the hybrid layer, but we also have other events going on. And maybe in vivo, we could have something that looks more like healing of the hybrid layer. So again, we see the odontoblastic process in the middle of the resin tag. Again, we see signs here that seems that might be collagen degradation, but here we see the mineralization on top of the hybrid layer. So again, the odontoblastic process was seen within the dentist. So could this be healing of the hybrid layer? So we sometimes we keep always talking about the same things we read, so we're straightforward to that. So, but sometimes we can face something and we don't believe what we're seeing. So this is an interesting study. This when I was trying to understand what was happening, I looked at in vivo studies, and this study is from Dr. Koshiro from Japan. He did it together with Dr. Vanderbeek, and they made in vivo. They made restorations in monkeys, and after 1 year, they extracted the teeth. And it's interesting that his conclusion here in this image, he described it as probably something went wrong, and the acids didn't remove the mineral correctly in this after 1 year. But what I believe what happened was that occurred mineral remineralization of the interface. So that's why we see degradation, but after 30 years, we see clinical studies saying that everything's okay. So of course, I'm gonna have to jump maybe 200 slides. And I'd like to thank you all for coming. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than glad to answer. Just the easy ones. Okay, thank you very much. And enjoy the end of the meeting. Thank you once more for inviting.
Thank you, Dr. Hayes, for the presentation. Now we're going to open for questions. Does anyone want to make any?
If you want to ask in Portuguese, it's okay too. We can translate into English. Japanese, I need translation. Okay, if you don't ask now, I won't answer questions in the break. Okay. All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll ask. I'm going to ask Dr. Giannini to come here to give him the certificate and the present. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Now, sorry. Again? Now it's coffee break until 4:15 p.m. Please get back here. Thank you.
Ainda bem que você me perguntou. E eu perdi minhas águas aqui e caí derramei
Quiet nights of quiet stars, quiet tours from my guitar, floating on the silence that surrounds us. Quiet thoughts and quiet dreams, quiet woods by quiet streams, and a window that looks out on Corcovado. Oh, how lovely. This is where I wanna be, here with you so close to me, till the finer flicker of life's summer. I was lost and lonely, believing life was only a bitter tragic show. Have fun with you. The meaning of existence, oh my love. quiet stars, quiet chords from my guitar, floating on the silence that surrounds us. Quiet thoughts and quiet dreams, quiet walks by quiet streams, climbing hills where lovers go to watch the world below together. We will live eternally in this mood of reverie, away from all the earthly cares around us. I was lost and lonely, believing life was only a little tragic show.
mesmo escutar uma canção especial? Com o Spotify Premium, você ouve a música que quiser, quando quiser, até no smartphone. No Spotify Premium, você ouve música on demand. Experimente agora.
Agora você vai ter mais um motivo para ficar na faculdade. Quem é universitário, paga meia para ser premium no Spotify. Você vai pagar só R$ 8,50 por mês para poder ouvir os seus artistas preferidos onde e quando quiser, online ou offline, com músicas on demand e skip ilimitado. Isso mesmo, enquanto você estiver na faculdade, você vai pagar menos pelo melhor do Spotify. E não, a gente não quer.
Pessoal, gostaria só de dar um recado para vocês de hoje à noite, por gentileza. Eu vou falar em português mesmo, que os japoneses já estarão lá no jantar. O jantar é a partir das 7h30, estão todos convidados. E quem quiser não precisa comprar aqui. A adesão é direta no restaurante, tudo bem? Então, a partir das 7h30 hoje no Monte Sul e amanhã no Vila Itália, tá bem? Can we get back to the presentations, please? Now we're going to have the presentation of Dr. Roberto Braga that will present ion release in restorative dental composites, materials development and remineralization potential. Dr. Braga is a full professor and vice chair of the Department of Biomaterials and Neurobiology. Now, I'm going to ask Dr. Braga to begin his presentation, and we're going to have 30 minutes of presentation, and at the end, the questions and discussions of the lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vanessa. Well, hello. It's the last talk of the day, so I hope you guys are not too tired. And I'm going to try to be as entertaining as possible, and I'm going to start by not standing there. I'm going to move around so you guys can follow me and stay awake. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank Marcelo and Professor Tagami for inviting me for this workshop. And also, I must say that I'm so impressed that they put together this workshop in less than 2 months. When I met Marcelo in August, late August, and he said, okay, our proposal was approved, so I need to organize the workshop in October. So in 2 months, all our Japanese friends are here, all of you are here, so congratulations for the effort. This is very important. And this meeting is very important because I believe most of us, myself included, we have been following the Japanese research on adhesion, mostly also on dental composites, and we really appreciate all their contribution over the years. So it's great to meet them in person and discuss research with them. So, but I'm not going to talk about adhesion. I haven't been doing research on adhesion for a while. I work with resin composites. For the past 10 to 20 years, I've been doing composites research, composition, properties, relationship. I've done quite a bit of work on polymerization stress. But for the past 5 years, I decided to investigate what we called, like in a broad term, like bioactive composites, which are materials that are capable of releasing ions that would foster remineralization of enamel and dentin. So that's what I'm gonna present for you. So most of you may be aware of this paper published in 2014, where the authors compared the clinical behavior of amalgam against resin composites, and they found that the risk of restoration failure after 5 to 7 years is twice as large for composite restorations compared to amalgam restorations. And the reasons for this difference in performance, it's clear for us. We know that amalgam have a self-sealing ability because of the deposition of oxides at the tooth restoration interface that prevents bacterial colonization. Resin composites, on the other side, they favor plaque accumulation, biofilm accumulation. So composites accumulate more biofilm than enamel or amalgam. And composite restorations have retention sites that also favor biofilm accumulation. So this is a replica of a restoration. Here's the enamel, here's the composite. This restoration was made in the lab, so like ideal conditions, and the replica was prepared right after photoactivation. And what we see here is a gap caused by polymerization stress, and depending on the composite material that we use to restore the cavity, the percentage of gaps at the margins can be somewhere from 20 to 40%. So in the laboratory, when we make a composite restorations with enamel margins, we start with gaps. And over time, if we get like hydrolytic and enzymatic degradation of the bonded interface, we create even more retention sites. And bacteria love this dark, secluded space to grow. If you are a low caries risk patient, that shouldn't be a problem. But if you are a high caries risk patient, you might run into trouble. Because, as Cynthia mentioned in the morning, depending on your sugar intake, the frequency of your sugar intake, and the amount of biofilm that you have on your teeth, you may reduce the longevity of your restorations by 3 times. So the 10-year failure rate of composite restorations in molars and premolars is about 3 times higher for patients that have high caries risk. So, can we incorporate some sort of defense mechanism into current restorative composites? So, we talked about this for a while, or for a little bit this morning, and that's the question that's been like frequently asked in the last few years. In 2017, 3 literature reviews were published on this topic, talking about new developments on restorative composites, and all these three papers talk about bioactive composites. And when we think about developing bioactive composites, there are two main roads that we can take. Either we incorporate antibacterial agents to the material to reduce biofilm growth, or we may add ion-releasing particles that would prevent the development of caries lesions around the restorations. So these are the two main approaches to develop bioactive composites. So if you're interested in looking in more detail about like all these new developments, I strongly recommend that you take a look at these papers. This one you can just leave for the end if you have some time, but the other two I highly recommend. So there are some commercial materials that can release ions. These are materials that are currently on the market. Not all of them have calcium phosphates. Most of them have bioactive glasses, ion-releasing glasses. They are proprietary glasses. Each manufacturer has its own glass. But basically, what they say is that these materials can release calcium, phosphate, aluminum, and other ions that will help to, they say you remineralize lesions, but I prefer to say like postpone lesion development, because that's what we really want, right? We want to put a restoration in a cavity, and we want that restoration to be, to postpone caries development, if possible. And not that we have already a lesion and then we're going to remineralize the lesion. But if you think about this process, of course, we want more remineralization. What do we expect from these materials? They will release ions, therefore they will increase the concentration of ions in the surrounding environment. And then when we have like the pH going back up after a pH challenge, so there will be more ions to be captured or to return to the tooth structure. That's one idea, but it's not probably what will happen because we have saliva, and if this material keeps releasing, if these materials keep releasing ions continuously, probably the patient will be swallowing these ions and they won't be there when needed. So what these materials should do, as Cynthia mentioned in the morning, is to provide ions to the biofilm and the pellicle on the tooth, and these ions will be available when necessary. Also, there are studies showing that if you have calcium in the plaque or the biofilm, this calcium helps to the retention of fluoride in the biofilm. So if you have calcium in the biofilm, you get more fluoride also. There are actually studies where people are trying like calcium mouth rinses to improve fluoride retention. Okay, so among these materials, this is the only one that has actually calcium phosphate, which is amorphous calcium phosphate. Unfortunately, there's very little independent research on these materials. I think the only exception is this one that's been in the market for a longer time. But this is a new material. This is also kind of new, and this is from a small company that really does not much information available. So if we want to make a composite bioactive or ion releasing, the basic idea is to get some sort of calcium phosphate powder that you can buy from like Sigma, for example, and add to a resin composite. So there are several different types of calcium phosphate, or better, calcium orthophosphates, because they are derived from orthophosphoric acid. So there's ACP, there are monocalcium, dicalcium, tricalcium, tetracalcium phosphate, hydroxyapatite, it's another form of calcium orthophosphate. So we chose for our research dicalcium phosphate dihydrate. It's just DCPD. This is the chemical structure here. And these are just off-the-shelf particle. They have a medium size of 8 micrometers. You can see there are like large particles here, you know, like about 30 or 40 microns, and really tiny particles. But the median is about 8 microns. Why we chose DCPD? Well, first of all, it's more soluble than other calcium phosphates. So we believe that by using a more soluble form of calcium phosphate, we can get more ion release with a lower concentration in the material. And you'll see in a minute that that's important. And also, which is very important for dentists, its refractive index, it's similar to barium glass. So if I add DCPD to an unfilled resin, what I get is pretty much what I get if I add barium. If I add hydroxyapatite, for example, which has a different refractive index, the composite gets like very opaque to the point that I cannot really light cure it to like a usual 2 millimeter depth. So DCPD is more soluble and more like optically compatible. Okay, so our first study, we took those off-the-shelf particles and added to a BSGMA, TGGMA resin, and also put some barium glass in it. We made like biaxial flexural strain specimens, we broke the discs, looked at the SEM, and we saw this, a composite with a lot of holes in it. What are these holes? These are the places where the calcium phosphate particles detached when the crack front came through. And if you look at the numbers, you can see here we have like our control material without DCPD, only barium glass. Here we replaced 10% of the barium glass with DCPD, and here 20%. So the more DCPD I add, I get a decrease in strength, about 25% decrease in strength, which is not much, but of course we wouldn't like this. Wouldn't like this to happen. So first message, calcium phosphates are not reinforcing particles. If I add calcium phosphate to the material, it will get weaker. But it might not get too weak. It might still be something useful. So the next step was to think about a way to improve the bond strength of these materials. And our idea was to functionalize the DCPD particles. By functionalizing, we are aiming at improving the wetting of the calcium phosphate by the resin matrix, because we are making that particle surface more compatible with the resin matrix. So we improve the mechanical interlocking between the matrix and the particle. Also, we can establish a chemical interaction between the calcium phosphate and the resin matrix. In some cases, we may be able to reduce agglomeration of the nanoparticles and work with smaller agglomerates, which is also good from the mechanical standpoint. And of course, we don't want our functionalization to reduce ion release. So this is not new. In dentistry, there are papers that have been working with calcium phosphate functionalization. They try to silanate the particles, which worked from a mechanical standpoint, but silanes are hydrophobic, and therefore ion release was reduced. So it doesn't really work for us as it should. And there are studies also functionalizing hydroxyapatite with carboxylic acids with good results also mechanically, but they didn't look at ion release. They were not interested in bioactivity. They were just looking at hydroxyapatite as an alternative to reinforce the composite. So we thought, okay, why don't we use one of the monomers present in the resin matrix to functionalize the calcium phosphate particles? And we decided to use TGDMA. Probably you are familiar with this molecule. It's present in pretty much every commercial formulation. And why we chose TGDMA? Well, first, because it's present in every composite formulation, but also because it's a low viscosity monomer, so it can wet the surface. Also, it has ether groups, and the oxygen atoms in the ether groups have electron pairs that can establish a ion dipole bond with calcium. And ion dipole bonds are stronger than hydrogen bonds, for example. So that was our idea. Low viscosity, possibility of chemical interaction with calcium, and of course, it can copolymerize with the resin matrix. So in our first study, we prepared these particles, and I'm not gonna bore you with details of the synthesis. I'll be more than happy to discuss with you. But we prepared the particles. It's actually a pretty simple procedure. It's very sensitive to pH and temperature, but otherwise it's quite straightforward. And we got a TGMA content on the particles of about 8.5% in weight. Surface area was increased by functionalization. This is the control, the non-functionalized particles that we also synthesized, only without adding the TGMA. And here is the median size of the particles. Again, we did like the biaxial flexural strain test. As controls, we had a true composite with silanized silica. This is 20 volume%, right? Each material here, except the unfilled resin, of course, has a 20% in volume of particles. So this is 20% in volume of silanized silica. Here is 20% in volume of functionalized DCPD, and here is the non-functionalized DCPD. And we saw a 32% increase in fracture strength when we used the functionalized DCPD instead of the non-functionalized DCPD. We didn't get close to the strength of the composite, but remember, these are not reinforcing fillers, and we actually didn't get similar strength to the unfilled resin. So the reason the strength of the composite with DCPD, mostly the non-functionalized DCPD, is lower than the unfilled resin is because if you don't have the particles bonded to the resin matrix, these particles behave as defects in the material. That's why the strength drops, okay? So functionalization is not perfect, so we get an increase in strength, but not to the point that we get the same strength or recover the strength of the unfilled material. If we look at the fractured surface at the SEM, so you can see the particles, they are plate-like, so they're plates of DCPD, and here we don't have reinforcing fillers, so what you see here is the resin matrix, and here are the particles, okay? The next step would be to add the same particles to a composite. So here we had the unfilled resin plus reinforcing fillers and the DCPD. But this time we did something else. We also changed or varied the TGDMA content on the DCPD particles. So by changing a few things in the synthesis, we can modulate the amount of TGDMA on the particles. And you see the agglomeration didn't change much. And then we made 7 different composites. So here's our control without DCPD, all glass. Here we have composites where we replace 10% of the glass with DCPD, and here 20%. And we had 3 different types of DCPD particles, like the non-functionalized, the low TGDMA, which is 14%, and the high TGDMA, which is 22%. So for the composite with the low calcium phosphate content, we saw a 40% increase in strength when we changed from the non-functionalized calcium phosphate to the high TGDMA calcium phosphate. We're still 17% below the control, but not too bad. When we added 20% or replaced 20% of the glass with calcium phosphate, we didn't see an effect of the level of TGDMA, but we did see an effect of functionalization. And here is the SEM of the fractured surface again. So you can see here the calcium phosphate. If you want to see it better, clearer, we can use EDS to map the chemical elements, and then we can paint barium in blue, for example, and calcium in yellow, and we can see that the calcium phosphate is well dispersed in the matrix. And here at a higher magnification, you can see like, remember, this is the fractured surface. So you see like some of the particles sticking out, some empty spaces here where probably the particle was on the other half of the specimen. And here you can see like in more detail how the particles look like. Okay, so it's very important for us, besides the mechanical properties, to look at ion release. So this is a 7-day calcium release from those materials. So the non-functionalized DCPD, low TGMA, and high TGDMA, 10% and 20%. Here it's in millimole per liter. Here is ppm. At the time we were using more millimole per liter, but now we are like switching to ppm because it's more friendly, the numbers. So of course, if you increase the DCPD content in the material, you have more calcium release. And if you increase functionalization, you have a reduction in ion release. And why is that? Because if I have monomer in my particle, I have less calcium, or calcium phosphate. So if I have, the more monomer I have in the particle, that means I have less calcium phosphate. Therefore, ion release tends to decrease. Okay, so the question is, do they work? I mean, is it possible to remineralize the lesions using these materials? So we did this study using transverse microradiography, TMR. We had 6 experimental groups, one with the exposed lesion. We produced lesions, like in vitro, and then we placed the composites on top of the lesion, and we had a control with no DCPD, and then 4 materials with 10 or 20%, functionalized or non-functionalized. So here we have, like, we divided the lesion in thirds to facilitate the interpretation of the data. So you can tell that for the exposed lesion, after 14 days of pH cycling, the lesion lost more mineral. So if you look at the images, here is the lesion, the exposed lesion, before pH cycling, and here is after pH cycling. You can see it got a little deeper. I say before and after, but actually we protect one side of the specimen and leave the other side exposed to the pH cycling. Okay, so if we look at the top of the lesion, we didn't see differences among materials, including the control without DCPD. So the top surface of the lesion doesn't matter if I have DCPD or not. If I cover the lesion with anything, it will prevent further demineralization because the solutions used in pH cycling have calcium in it. So probably this calcium is causing this change, positive change in mineral content. But if we look at the middle third of the lesion, then we can tell that the calcium phosphate composites promoted a mineral gain of the lesion while the control composite didn't. And at the bottom of the lesion, kind of the same scenario. And if we look at the images here, you can tell that the lesion, this is just an example, of course, the lesion got smaller after the pH cycling. Okay, so this is okay, in the literature we can find studies that use the similar method. You make the lesion first, then coat that lesion with the composite, submit that to pH cycling, and then check what happened. So these studies, they use like a different composition, different pH cycling regime. So the results are a bit different numerically, but we are kind of in the same ballpark. So our results kind of match what we saw in the literature. But as I said before, what we really want from this, we expect from this material is that they will prevent caries lesion development. So the patient will have a bigger chance of going to the dentist before the damage is too high. So this is a preliminary study, but I wanted to bring this data. Here we used simple micro-hardness testing. We prepared the restorations, and we used like our control composite and 2 composites with DCPD and a resin-modified glass ionomer. Then we submitted these specimens to the same pH cycling as before. And after that, we sectioned the specimens and measured the transverse micro-hardness at different depths, 10 to 90 microns. So what we would expect if the material had a protective effect would be like all these boxes to be like around 0, right? No mineral gain, no mineral loss. But what we saw actually is that for the control composite, the top of the lesion was okay, as we said, as we saw in the first study. But then, if you go deeper, you see a reduction in micro-hardness. For the DCPD composites, look, they are more concentrated around the 0 line, which is good. That's what we expect. The 20%, you see, like scattering is pretty high in these studies. So that's something we are working on, trying to reduce the variability. And look at the glass ionomer. It does a pretty good job at the surface, actually increasing the micro-hardness. But deeper in the lesion, you don't see much of an effect. Okay, so then the next step is to, okay, TGDMA works. What if we use the same molecule, but change the spacer group, the length of the spacer group? So we use 1, 2, 3, and 4 ethylene glycol groups. And first thing we notice that EGDMA doesn't bond to calcium because the oxygen atoms they are too close to the methacrylate group. So the calcium doesn't have access to that oxygen atom because the methacrylate group is too big. Then if we use DGDMA, we got pretty high functionalization, even if we use a lower amount of monomer in the synthesis. This is the monomer to ammonium phosphate ratio. So for DGDMA, we get like the maximum retention even using like a low ratio. But for TGDMA and the TET-DMA, we need to increase the concentration to get like a higher retention on the calcium phosphate. That's because we believe this result is because DGDMA has one oxygen atom right at the center of the molecule, while these ones, they are longer, they can twist and make the oxygen atoms less available. So I need to increase the chance of an oxygen atom meeting a calcium ion by increasing the concentration. Okay, so reducing agglomeration is a goal. Okay, so we tell here that if we increase the spacer group, we get less functionalization. Okay, so that's one finding. We want to reduce the particle size and the agglomeration. We did get a reduction in DGDMA. You'll see later on that this is not really, didn't have much of an effect. So one thing, just a kind of a parenthesis here. You see on the papers, like published papers, nanoparticles, nanoparticles. So do we really have nanoparticles? I don't know. We do have nanoparticles, but we also have a lot of submicron and micrometric particles too. So it looks good to write like, oh, my composite has nanoparticles, but for real, they don't have only nanoparticles. So this is an agglomerate of the DGDMA, the DCPD functionalized with DGDMA.
So what I'm calling an agglomerate or a particle is just one of these. Okay, about 10 microns, that's what we saw with the dynamic laser scattering. So if we look at this tiny particle here and put it under the transmission electron microscope, you see that we have nanoparticles. They are nanoplates that form microplates. But I don't know exactly what's the percentage of nanoparticles and microparticles. I know I have all sizes. I have nanoparticles, agglomerates, but I also probably have like solid, large particles. So that's why sometimes I refer to them as agglomerates or particles. I haven't made up my mind yet what I should call them, but maybe in the future I will. Okay, so as usual, we added those particles to resin, just unfilled resin. No reinforcing fillers here. And we did get the best result with the DMA 2:1. These particles, they have high surface area, so which is good for ion release, which suggests that they are nanoparticle agglomerates, or at least they're very porous particles. Okay, so statistical analysis tells me that this is equals to the control, but I don't believe it because the difference is too big. So it's almost equal, but okay, we're still kind of far from the unfilled control. But it's better than the non-functionalized particles. One thing that was different this time is that the elastic modulus usually doesn't change with functionalization. But this time, all the functionalized particles had, the materials with functionalized particles had lower modulus than the material with non-functionalized particles. And why? Well, because it depends on the amount of monomer you have on your particle. If you have too much monomer, you end up with a low modulus filler because you have too much organic content on the particle. So here's the idea. So you have the agglomerate here. This is the non-functionalized agglomerate. So you have all the nanoparticles kind of packed together, like on this image here. You have a higher density of the powder and a relatively low surface area. But if you have a highly functionalized particle, then you have, like, the plates are interspaced with the monomer, so you have a much lower density, a higher surface area, and you look at the TEM, and you see some of the plates are actually kind of perpendicular to the others. So which means that there are space between them. So the take-home message is that at this point, what we have are in vitro and in situ studies, not that many, but a few, that show that it's possible to remineralize or postpone lesion development, which is, in my opinion, is more important, with calcium phosphate containing composites. It's important to know that calcium phosphate particles are not reinforcing fillers, and therefore reductions in fracture strength and other mechanical properties are expected. Well, this reduction in strength can be reduced by functionalization and reduction in particle size or agglomeration. So I have like smaller defects in the material. By the way, I cannot get smaller agglomerates using dimethacrylates because they are apolar. If I want to reduce agglomeration, I need to use a monomer that has charge in it. So the particles will be like charged and they will repel each other, right? So if I use TGDMA or any dimethacrylate, because they are not polar, I'm not going to get a reduction in agglomeration. Depending on the organic content, I may or may not get reduction in ion release. If I keep my organic content low, I have more calcium phosphate, therefore I can get similar ion release that I would get with non-functionalized particles. And if I use ethylene glycol dimethacrylate monomers, the size of the spacer group defines its affinity to calcium phosphate. Okay, just to introduce what we've been doing lately, we are not finished with this part yet. Because we want to reduce agglomeration, we moved on to acidic monomers, like functionalization with acidic monomers. So just to show you some pictures, here's our control. Then we used citric acid, which is a well-established monomer to reduce agglomeration. So it's called a stabilizer. So it stabilizes the calcium phosphate so the nanoparticles do not agglomerate, because it has like 3 hydroxyl groups that will ionize in water and create a charge around the particles. And also, we tested the MOEP monomer, which has a phosphate group. It has an ethylene glycol spacer and a dimethacrylate. Notice that this one will not copolymerize with the resin matrix because it doesn't have a methacrylate group, but this one will. But all these pictures are in the same magnification. So look how different they look. This one, of course, looks a lot smaller. You can see the median size here is kind of half of this, and this is kind of almost like twice this. So if you look at this one at higher magnification, that's what you see, like kind of a flower like this one, but much smaller. Then we added them to the composite and fractured the surfaces, the specimens, and here you can see the plates sticking out from the fractured surface. Here you can see this big particle. It's same magnification again, okay? So this one is our usual DCPD composite. This is all DCPD, okay? But just by changing the functionalizing agent, it can get totally different shapes, crystal shapes. So this is a large crystal. I'm not sure if that's gonna work. I didn't look at the numbers yet, but it's big, but it's very retentive. So if I can get a good mechanical interlocking, I might get some decent strength values. But here you cannot really see the calcium phosphate, so let's look at a higher magnification. You can see some calcium phosphate here, but again, we can resort to EDS and map the calcium and the barium. Okay, so we're still like working on the statistics and all the characterization of these materials, but I wanted to show where we are going. So before I end my presentation, I would like to thank all my students and other collaborators that have been helping me in these projects. Of course, FAPESP and CNPq for funding all of these projects. And finally, I want to take this opportunity to start promoting the next meeting of the Academy of Dental Materials next year in October. It will be in Porto de Galinhas. So please save the date. We already have the scientific program defined. We're going to have a session on ceramics, a session on remineralization, and a session on adhesion. Okay? So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Braga, for the lecture. And I'm going to open for questions.
Thank you very much. So I'm Toru Nikaido from Tokyo Medical and Dental University. I have 2 questions. One is that I don't understand the low TEGM and high TEGM. Please explain the differences. And the second one is you show the TMR result. So you show the remineralization using a DCPD. So in this case, so you the remineralization with the hydroxyapatite or other that demonstrates the formation of the hydroxyapatite.
Okay. Okay, the first question, the TGMA content. You can change the amount of TGMA left on the particles by changing the amount of TGMA you add during the synthesis. So if you use a higher concentration of monomer in the synthesis, then you end up with a higher concentration at the end. That's not like, as you saw, depending on the monomer, I'll get different percentages, but that's the basic idea, okay? And the second question, when we did the TMR studies, we didn't look into what kind of calcium phosphate is being deposited in the lesion. Maybe we should do that, but from what I've read in the literature, it could be anything, including hydroxyapatite. But it probably, I mean, hydroxyapatite is the most stable form of calcium phosphate. That's why everything theoretically tends to like become hydroxyapatite, but I cannot affirm what it is.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Professor Braga, thank you for the brilliant presentation. It was excellent. When we think about something coming out of a composite resin, immediately we think about the mechanical properties of the composite, the increase in porosity or something related to that. Did you have a chance to look at the mechanical properties of those experimental resins?
Yeah, that's a concern. Like if you have ion going out, it means that the particle is dissolving and probably we're going to end up with a pore or something. So we've been testing the materials after prolonged immersion. We tested, usually we do 28 days. We don't see much of a difference between composites with and without DCPD in terms of decreasing mechanical properties. Now we are finishing a study where we kept them in water for 60 days, and we have a study where we are following for 120 days. So we'll see, because in the literature there are not that many studies that followed these composites in water for a long time, and the two studies that we usually refer to, they have opposite results. One shows no degradation or extra degradation compared to the control. The other one shows that it has higher degradation. So we don't know yet. But up to 28 days, it's not too bad. I mean, it's not even worse than our control composite.
One more question, if I may. When you show results, for instance, enamel micro-hardness, you place the composite directly on enamel without the use of an adhesive system, or you use an adhesive system in between?
For the second study, we made a restoration as it's usually performed.
So there was an adhesive system there.
Acid etching and adhesive system, and then the composite.
So it means that those ions are going through the adhesive system and reaching the enamel.
Could be, or could be like in the immersion medium, and then going back to the enamel.
Going around?
Yeah, not around, but on the surface. If they are released from the surface of the restoration, they will be there, you know, like in the immersion medium, and they eventually will precipitate.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question? Oh, is there anyone else from the audience? No? It's almost, it's similar to what Dr. Hebling just asked, but I wonder if you had a chance to compare your DCPD experimental composite with the bioactive materials you even presented in the beginning of the lecture, or even the mechanical characteristics or ion releasing properties.
Unfortunately, most of the material, the commercial materials that I showed, they are not in Brazil. Maybe only beautiful.
Beautiful, yeah, beautiful too.
I did have the chance of testing the one with ACP, and mechanically it was very weak. That's why I think it's indicated for class 5 restorations, because it's a very weak composite. And the reason I'm working with calcium phosphate is not because I believe they're better than bioactive glasses. I really don't know. I never worked with bioactive glasses. But the idea was like I was reading papers from Antonucci and Hawking Zhu that have been published a lot on this topic, and I said, okay, this is a good starting point. And we were still kind of like on an initial phase, because it takes a long time to learn the synthesis and really control all the variables and learn about all the characterization methods and experimental methods. So it's still kind of new to us.
Thank you very much. Anyone else would like to make any questions? No? So I'm going to ask Dr. Giannini to come forward. Oh, Dr. Tagami, to come forward and give you the certificate. Thank you so much for the presentation. Now we have the posters presentation, so I hope everybody just don't go to the hotels yet. Just go outside so we can check the research. And again, I'd like to invite everybody to go to dinner tonight. And I hope you enjoyed our first day of the conference. Thank you so much for coming. It's very special for us.